Hi, this is Andy White with John Broughton on Retrospectives on 3SER KC Radio.
I believe from a very young age you had an interest in writing and music. Was your family an influence there?
Yeah, I had a upbringing which was filled with the sound of my father's old-fashioned typewriter clacking and clicking away, resounding throughout our house. I often wonder what it'd be like now for me, because the computer is such a silent thing. But my dad is a writer, and so it was pretty natural for us to see typewriters, see loads of bits of paper lying around, and so that was kind of part of our upbringing. And my grandmother was a piano player, and she would always be playing the piano. My mum is secretly very good at the piano, though claims she's not. So the piano was always in the house as well, and those two things are very important for me. I always wished I had learnt the piano properly with my granny, but it was a bit like being taught to drive by your father. It's not the easiest of things. Yeah.
Growing up in Ireland, what music was grabbing your attention in terms of recorded artists, and how accessible was that music to you?
Yeah, well, I had a mixture of stuff from my mum and dad, which was like old 60s music and Beatles records, which we'd hear at parties. Then really old-fashioned stuff, which my grandmother would play. She would have been as old as the century, or a little bit older, so the tunes that she would like to play would be from maybe the 20s or so. And then we had like an underpinning of Irish traditional music, which would be around the house as well, which as a result, when I became a teenager, I hated all those things, and only returned to enjoying traditional music after I'd listened to loud punk groups for my teenage years. In Belfast, there weren't a lot of tours would arrive in Belfast, so in the 70s there weren't really any places to play for young musicians, but there certainly weren't venues for people to come and play from overseas. And what would happen would be the live music scene would consist of punk groups, because the punk groups thought it was cool to come to Belfast, and because there were a lot of groups like that in Belfast around 1976. And folkies, like old hippie folk singers, who would also arrive, and they didn't care if they didn't care about the Troubles or anything. They would come anyway, and the left-wing ones would come especially. So I saw a mixture of folkies and punk groups, really, and I think all that went into my music as well, really.
You remember being particularly ambitious?
John, I'll just turn the coffee off.
Yeah, sure.
The same.
Particularly ambitious at all when you started out?
Oh, yeah. I just look at people nowadays and think, my God, thank goodness I'm not starting now, because I was very naive. I started off writing poetry and playing in groups as a teenager, and I really wrote most of the first album as poetry, and then I put it to music. A friend of mine got really annoyed with a 12-string acoustic guitar, and he chucked it out of a first-floor window and landed in the street, and asked him if I could keep it and take it home. And I'd played electric guitars up to that stage, but they'd all got stolen from a flat in London I was living in. I was back in Belfast and picked up the acoustic and put a lot of these poems to music, and they started to become songs. And I didn't really have any big ambition as to release records worldwide. I never had. When I was writing the first album, I didn't really think of anything like that, and I kind of thought the record was about falling in and out of love, and the kind of Belfast, the kind of Ireland that I grew up in, trying to make it real for people who listened to it, but not really expecting it to be released all over the world, which it eventually was. And that's what really drew me into the world of recorded music and touring and all that sort of thing. So I didn't have a specific set of ambitions. I certainly wouldn't have known anything about the music business as such.
You had an involvement with a Stiff label in those early days. Were you a fan of the music that label had previously represented?
Yeah, I loved it. I used to love the first Elvis Costello singles and the Ian Dury and the Blockhead singles, and again, looking back from now, they weren't really particularly punk records. They're just great rock records, fantastic, and a lot of the singles, which were like one-hit wonder kind of singles, like Reckless Eric and Lena Lovitch, and I used to love those things. And the boss of Stiff Records was called Dave Robinson, and he was an Irishman with a great eye for horse racing, and people used to say that he made a lot more money than the horses than he ever did with the records, but he certainly had the eye for a great record. So when he heard Religious Persuasion, I played it on a TV show in the UK, and this fairly straightforward, pretty serious song about taking a real ironic look at religious divisions in Ireland, Religious Persuasion. Played it on the TV, and Dave Robinson heard it, and he wanted to put it out as a single, or in fact an EP, and I was delighted. I went to his office, met him. I saw the baseball bat over his desk, which is what he was famous for, like, threatening people with. And I'd do little drawings and scribbles, and he loved them. He said, put one of those on the front, let's get it out. And he had a series of EPs coming out, and one of the other ones was a Pogues EP called The Streets of Soho, which is an absolutely beautiful song, like one of their best songs for me. Yeah. So I was really delighted. I was over the moon. I never signed anything with him, and I got some advice, like not to sign the dotted line, so I never did. And Stiff eventually went under, but it was a great start for me. And when you were on Stiff, like, you got immediately, everybody looked and listened to the record. It was really good.
Would you say you were pretty confident with your songwriting right from day one, or did that develop over time?
I wasn't really confident, especially writing with somebody else. I knew what I was on about, but I never was very confident writing with anybody else until Alt, the group I was in with Liam O'Mainley and Tim Finn. That was the first time I really co-wrote with other people in a serious fashion, though it wasn't a very serious process, but it was, we definitely wrote a whole album together. So, was I confident about my songwriting? I think most songwriters aren't really, like, ever. I mean, maybe Andrew Lloyd Webber is, or that woman who writes all the songs for Cher and Aerosmith. She seems pretty confident. I just read an article about her last week. She divides the songs she writes into, like, emotions, and has a formula for singles. Now, I don't really write like that, so I guess I belong in the slightly not self-confident camp, but infinitely more interesting, I would hope.
Do you?
I always thought Elvis Costello thought too much about his songwriting. I think you can really tell people who are just naturally great songwriters, and I'm not saying I'm one of those necessarily, but like, it's pretty easy to listen to a Paul Kelly record and to know that he's a just fantastic songwriter, whereas if you listen to an Elvis Costello record, a lot of the time you kind of listen to it and you think, well, this guy thinks he's a really great songwriter, and sometimes that means that the songs themselves don't really work for me.
I think he tries too hard sometimes.
Yeah, or just that he has this sense of himself as a songwriter, and I think there's something else which is much more charming for me, which is not like that. I used to think he was a brilliant mind, but I'm not really interested in what he does at the moment, to tell you the truth.
Do you think the music press has had a hard time trying to categorise your music as they like to do?
Well, I was in Amsterdam last week, and some guy announced me as I have to remember all the bits of it. It was something like psychedelic, surreal, folk, acoustic, pop, something like that. I just nodded and said, all right, that's cool. then I seem to remember the Dutch sold Manhattan to the Americans for very little. But I think that I'm not sure about the categories. Yeah, I'd say it's Irish, and I'd say it's acoustic, and it's got lots of words in it, and it's rocky more than traditional, but it's got lots of elements in it. I'm not quite sure, John. I kind of leave that to other people, but you're right. People really do want to know what kind of music you play, especially when you go to America. They really would like to know before they hear it what it's going to be.
Like to play around and tinker with your lyrics when writing?
Yeah, some of the most complicated ones, like Looking for James Joyce's Grave, for example, will just appear almost as they, almost in the length of time it takes to write them out. Some of the more simple ones really need shaping up, like Get Back Home, for example, which sounds fairly straightforward. Like I spent a long time trying to get all the exact words in the right places. So sometimes the simple ones are more difficult than the narrative ones. I used to start off, and when I was putting together the compilation, I was amazed at how many words I used to try and fit into each line. And I've come to the conclusion that I'm trying to lessen the number of words in the line, but still make them count as much.
How do you know when you've got it just right?
Oh my God!
You don't.
Oh, you don't really. Though when you record stuff, it's really good. Either when you co-write with people, and then you get the instant reaction of other people, or if you're recording. I mean, you kind of come to know when you're recording whether a song is like really worth sticking with. Though it's great to know before you go in, so you don't have to. I kind of edit myself all the time. I mean, we're recording a new studio album at the moment in Dublin, and I think there are going to be a lot of songs which are quite short. And normally, if I'd gone in with 16 songs, maybe they wouldn't all come out as being recorded. But this time, I think I'm going to have quite a lot of quite short songs on the record.
You maintain a pretty busy touring schedule. Are you able to write when you're on the road?
Well, what I write more is like a sort of diary thing, John, which is not the internet. People have tried to get me to put it on the web, so one day maybe I will. If I could only type it up, then I could maybe do that. But I get a lot of ideas from that, and I used to write a lot more when I was travelling than I do now. It kind of depends what theme I'm going to go for on the album. I like after you write 2, 3, 4 songs, you kind of start to see a theme for the record. Like Himself, my third record, I had lived in London, and I went back to Belfast, back to live in the countryside, Northern Ireland, and that was kind of an automatic theme. And I never knew that album would get released as widely as it did in Europe. I don't think it was released in Australia, but as a result, I was in Europe touring during a lot of the turbulent time when Eastern Europe was opening up. As a result of that, I was writing my next album, which was called Out There, and a lot of very long narrative songs were written about all those turbulent events. So I kind of get the theme when I'm. Those were themes which are outside. The Alt album was written practically all in Dublin and Melbourne, and it again led to teenage, which was the theme of teenage was like basically feeling like I was a teenager again, especially having become a dad and spending a lot of time pretending to be a train, lying on the floor, and. Obviously, if it's that kind of theme, then I'm not going to be writing about visiting some of the great places I get to visit. Something new on compilation is most definitely written in Melbourne in Australia. People think the green and gold maybe in the song is Irish, but it's in fact those colours for me are like very Australian. So, yeah, there's an example for you.
Yeah.
The latest stuff I've written all in our old wooden falling down house, which I'm speaking to you from. So it's different again.
In Switzerland, what prompted you move there?
Well, my wife is Swiss, and she came to Ireland and lived with me in Dublin for about 7 years, and this is in soccer we call it the return leg.
Yeah, fair enough.
Do you call it that in Australia?
I don't. We call it an away match.
Away, okay, this is the away match, but I don't think it'll be as long as that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where we'll end up, but this year definitely I'm here. And this year I'm not coming to Australia, which is really a shame. I've been to Australia most years around March.
Yeah.
But we're hoping to come over at the start of next year and maybe stay for quite a long time. Who knows?
Oh, tremendous.
Yeah, that's our ambition at the moment.
Is it difficult at times conducting business away from the major music capitals?
Well, it is, but it would be very difficult if it wasn't for the internet and email and stuff.
Yeah,
and it's really made such an incredible difference. I mean, it does take up a lot of time, but it's very much opened all that up. It's not a problem now. It would have been really a problem when I started. You really, growing up in Belfast, at that time you had to go to London for anything to happen. Nowadays you don't have to go to London, you can go to Dublin. But really the communication thing's made the big difference there. Yeah.
Are there any...
Presumably you can live in like a really out of the way place in Australia and still do all the same kinds of things that you can do normally.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure. Though there's lots to be said in like turning up to actually have a drink with somebody and get some personal contact going. You can't really beat that,
Are there any further plans for Realt?
The last thing we did was a special request tour in Japan at the very end of 1998, not last year, the year before. The album Altitude was released nearly everywhere in the world, but it had never been released in Japan. So a company put it to us that they'd like to release Altitude, put some extra tracks on it. There's some really great extra tracks on the Japanese version, and organise a tour. So we rang each other. Everybody was free, and we did a 10-day tour of Japan. Got on really well. Played some totally bizarre gigs. The first gig was in a huge hall with multiple slide projectors behind us, like big projection screens and incredible lighting. The next gig was a tiny rock club. The next gig was totally different, and it was quite an amazing experience. Tim brought his new baby along, and his wife. Liam brought his didgeridoo and his baron, and I don't know what I brought. I brought my Australian guitar and my little old computer and notebook. We had a great time. The concerts were true alt concerts. They were very different. Like we started to change the format of the show, and we made the middle section of the show a chat show, and I was the chat show host. Liam was the only guest, and Tim was the cheeky piano player, or the musical director, I should say. And that threatened in Japan. Their English is really good once they see the words or once they hear a phrase they know. Yeah. And they were very, very quick to take up on the theme of chat show. They definitely knew that phrase, and it could run and run. It could actually take over the musical show. So I think we may reappear as TV personalities.
Has a project like that, I guess, made you more comfortable on stage as a solo performer in other situations?
Yeah, I mean, it gave a lot of confidence. It was great for all of us as the lead vocalist to share the lead vocals, because it was truly, I mean, truly the songs were shared. I mean, Tim obviously had done that before, but I know that Liam had never done that, and I had certainly never done it. Liam had been in the band before, but this was kind of different from a band, and I had never been in a band before. I'd had a band, but I'd never been in a band. So it was a great experience, and I'm sure we'll do it again. It'll just take time. It'll probably take until Liam has a solo record out, and I think Tim's got a solo record coming out. So I think all those things will have to go through, and then maybe at the end of them we'll see a new alt project, because it certainly was it captured some zeitgeist, some lo-fi inspirational sort of thing, and even the name was pretty prophetic. I mean, we chose our name via the ABBA theory of choosing a name for a band. So we didn't have any idea that it would become would become a shortened thing for abbreviation for alternative, and which especially in America, when we toured America, they thought we'd really thought this up, but we hadn't. But that was the whole thing about alt. It was a thing of exquisite imperfection, as Tim used to put it.
Now, there was a recent compilation of your work put out on CD. What input did you have into the track listing on that?
Well, interestingly enough, that connects with what we've just been talking about. The compilation was a result of a request from Japan, who had some of my records released, but they didn't have them all, and they asked before the alt tour if I could put together a compilation of the best known tracks in Ireland from all of those records. So I woke up to the fact that I had 6 solo albums out. So if I took two songs from each and 2 extra ones for those fans who have out all the songs, then really you got a full CD, and that was it. So actually, that was the impetus, was a Japanese request, and once I had it, and I looked at the sleeve, I looked at the intense young man on the front of the first album, and I thought, right, I'll do a photo session just like on the first album, except I'll do it in colour. And once we had the package and we had all the best known songs on it, then other countries started to pick it up and release it. It was great, including Australia. So, which is good, because I don't think all of the separate albums ever really came out in Australia. Some of them did, but they didn't all.
Some did, some didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's like an internet album called Rare, which goes along with compilation, which is maybe more interesting to people who have got a lot of their albums. It's got all the B-sides and live things and outtakes and stuff like that. Stuff which is really difficult to get outside Ireland.
Right. But that's internet only at the moment, that one, is it?
Yeah, you can't get that in shops. You can get the compilation, I think, in Australia, but you can't get the Rare. You can only get Rare on the internet.
And just to wind up, I believe there's a live album coming out shortly too.
Yeah, I've had a great relationship with WOMAD, who you'll know from WOMADelaide, and all the Peter Gabriel people. We just made a connection with the spirit of the words and the storytelling thing and the poetry, and I play a lot of concerts in Europe with this rather amazing violin player called David Crichton from Glasgow in Scotland, and we played a lot of WOMAD festivals last year. They're like WOMADelaide. They're not all as big as that, but there might be about 25 per year. About 20 of them are in Europe, and we played quite a lot of them over the last couple of years. And WOMAD asked us if we'd go, and people would be asking for an album which represented our live show, which is very acoustic with me and a violin and some numbers with the band, but not most of it's acoustic. So WOMAD invited us to Peter Gabriel's studio for 3 days, and we did a lot of live recording there. And there's an album called Speechless, which is the result, and it's just about to come out. It's coming out in March, and I guess it should be out through WOMAD, through Real World Records in Australia.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's tremendous.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful thing to be associated with, and again, our ambition would be to be able to play WOMAD Adelaide, because it's a wonderful festival, really amazing. But all the WOMAD things they're special. They're you just go to them. You don't necessarily know anybody who's playing on the bill. You just know it's going to be a great event. It's going to look great. It's going to feel great, and all the people there are going to be cool. I mean, that's what it's like in England or in Europe. So I'm sure it's like that in Australia.
Yeah, it's a real music lovers festival, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and you just get surprised all the time. They're not really interested in booking festivals like big rock festivals where people go to it because they know a certain amount of people on the bill. They want to attract people who want to be surprised by stuff from really far away.
Absolutely, I think that's the beauty of it.
That's the beauty of it, exactly. And it's the same thing with the record company. Like, you can, if you're interested in being surprised, you can buy most albums on Real World Records and be interested in them, get something from them at least.
Okay, Andy, look, thanks for your time. It's been fantastic to finally catch up with you.
Okay, John, yeah, I mean, it's worth those emails. That was great.
Yeah, terrific. And, well, you're always a welcome visitor down here, so we'll keep our fingers crossed you'll make it down here next year and spend some time with us.
Absolutely. I'll definitely let you know if I know when I'm coming.
Yep.
And keep in touch. If you change your email address, send us a new one. If you keep the same one, I'll buzz you at the end of this year.
Will do. That's fantastic.
Great.
Okay, Andy, take care.
Thanks a million, John.
All the best.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.